The conference hall inside the Dallas headquarters was unusually quiet. Hundreds of employees sat in neat rows of chairs facing the stage at the front of the room. A massive screen displayed the company logo, glowing softly above the polished wooden platform. Some employees whispered to each other while they waited. Others checked their phones. A few adjusted their ties and straightened their posture. Today was important. The CEO himself was about to speak. Many of them had worked inside this company for years, without ever seeing him in person. They knew the name. Raymond, a billionaire businessman, a man who built one of the most successful technology service firms in Texas. But most employees only knew him from professional photographs in company newsletters. Calm expression, perfect suit, sharp blue eyes, a leader who rarely appeared in public. Then the side door of the conference hall opened. Footsteps echoed gently across the stage. A tall man walked forward, dressed in a dark tailored suit. The room became silent. Some employees leaned forward. Others frowned slightly. Something about the man looked strangely familiar. He stopped at the center of the stage and calmly looked across the crowd. For a few seconds, nobody spoke. Then Raymond stepped closer to the microphone. His voice carried clearly through the room. "For the past 7 days," he said calmly, "I walked through this building, dressed as someone you believed didn't matter." The sentence hung in the air. Confusion spread across the audience. Several employees looked at each other. A few faces turned pale. Raymond continued, "I wore worn clothes. I carried an old backpack. I stood in the lobby. I sat outside this building." Murmurs began spreading through the room, because suddenly, many of them realized something shocking. They had seen that man, the quiet, homeless man who had been sitting outside the building. The man security tried to remove. The man some employees had laughed at. Raymond rested both hands on the podium. "That man," he said slowly, "was me." Gasps filled the conference hall. One employee covered his mouth. Another lowered his head immediately. Several people froze in their seats as the truth settled over the room like a heavy weight. The CEO they respected was the same man many of them had treated like he didn't belong. And the silence that followed felt louder than any words. Raymond allowed the silence inside the conference hall to settle. No one moved. Employees who had laughed days earlier now avoided looking at the stage. Others stared forward with stunned expressions, trying to process the truth they had just heard. Raymond's voice remained steady. "Let me ask all of you something." He paused, scanning the room slowly. "If a man who looked homeless walked into your workplace today, would you treat him like a human being?" The question hung in the air. Several employees shifted in their chairs. A few lowered their eyes. Others stared straight ahead, unable to answer even in their own minds, because now the question felt personal. Raymond leaned slightly closer to the microphone. "When people believe someone has no power, no title, no influence, that's when real character shows itself." He straightened again. "And over the past week, I witnessed something that changed the way I see this company." The screen behind him remained dark for now, but everyone in the room knew something important was coming. At that moment, the story pauses, because what Raymond was about to reveal didn't begin in this conference hall. It began several days earlier, with a simple decision. Before we continue, let's take a moment. Welcome back to Mr. George Stories, where life's most powerful lessons come wrapped in unforgettable tales. If you're new to this family, thank you for joining us. Please hit the subscribe button, because it helps us share stories like this with more people on YouTube. And here's something I'd love to hear from you. If you saw someone who looked like they had nothing, would you stop and help them? Or would you walk past like most people do? Tell me in the comments below, because the answer to that question might reveal more about a person than any job title ever could. Now, let's go back to the moment that started everything. The moment when a billionaire CEO decided to walk into his own company as someone nobody would respect. Raymond turned slightly toward the large screen behind him. "For the past 7 days," he said, "I observed this company from a position none of you expected." The screen flickered to life. The first video appeared, a security camera view of the main entrance. Employees walked through the glass doors, carrying briefcases and coffee cups. Near the edge of the frame stood a man wearing worn jeans, a wrinkled jacket, and a small backpack. Several people in the room immediately recognized the image. It was the homeless man, Raymond. The video continued. One employee approached the entrance, glanced at the man, then turned away with visible discomfort. Another employee walked past and whispered something to a coworker. The coworker laughed quietly as they entered the building. A few people in the conference hall shifted in their seats. The video changed. Now the screen showed the lobby. Raymond stood near the security desk, speaking calmly. The guard pointed toward the exit, clearly telling him to leave. Some employees passing through the lobby slowed down just long enough to watch. None of them stepped forward. None of them spoke. The room inside the conference hall remained silent. Raymond did not raise his voice. He simply continued watching the screen with everyone else. Another clip appeared. This one showed a group of employees standing near their desks. Raymond walked past them quietly. One of them smirked and said something that caused the others to laugh. Even though the audio wasn't clear, everyone in the conference hall understood what had happened. A few heads lowered further. Then the screen went dark for a moment. Raymond folded his hands in front of him. But the story of this week, he said softly, is not only about the moments that disappointed me. The screen lit up again. This time, the image showed the building entrance early in the morning. The same homeless man stood near the doors. Employees hurried inside without stopping. Then someone approached, a woman holding a tray with 2 coffees. She slowed down when she noticed him standing there. The conference hall grew even quieter. The woman spoke to him for a moment. Then she handed him one of the coffees. Raymond looked up at the screen, and the entire room watched that simple moment play out in silence. The city of Dallas woke up early. By sunrise, the highways were already alive with movement. Cars filled the wide lanes stretching across the city. Commuters heading toward offices, construction crews arriving at job sites, and delivery trucks making their early morning rounds. Downtown Dallas stood tall in the center of it all. Glass towers reflected the bright Texas sky, while the rising sun painted the buildings with warm golden light. From a distance, the skyline looked powerful and confident, like a city that had no intention of slowing down. One building in particular stood higher than most nearby structures. Its polished glass exterior reflected the surrounding skyline like a mirror. Inside those walls worked hundreds of employees, who helped keep one of the fastest-growing technology service firms in Texas running every day. And at the top of that company was one man, Raymond. At 38 years old, Raymond had already accomplished more in business than most executives twice his age. His story had become something people discussed in business schools and entrepreneurial podcasts. He started his company with a small consulting team and a modest office space. In the beginning, the work was simple, helping small businesses modernize their technology systems and improve efficiency. But Raymond saw possibilities others missed. He expanded the company carefully, one project at a time. He hired talented people, studied industry trends, and built partnerships that slowly turned his small consulting firm into something much larger. Within a decade, the company had grown into a respected technology service organization working with major clients across Texas. The financial world took notice. Magazines wrote articles about Raymond's strategic thinking. Analysts praised his leadership style. Investors described him as someone who understood business in ways others didn't. Over time, his success reached a level that placed him among the wealthiest entrepreneurs in the region. People used many words when describing him: billionaire, visionary, CEO. But those titles only showed part of who Raymond really was. In person, he was far quieter than most people expected. His pale blue eyes rarely showed strong emotion during meetings. His voice carried calm authority, never raised, never rushed. When he spoke, people listened carefully, not because he demanded attention, but because his words usually carried weight. Inside the company, employees respected him deeply. Some admired him from a distance. Others felt nervous whenever they entered a meeting room, where he sat at the head of the table reviewing reports. Raymond had built a reputation for being fair, but extremely observant. He noticed details. He paid attention to how people behaved, and he believed that a company's success depended on more than numbers on a financial report. For Raymond, culture mattered. The way employees treated one another, the way managers spoke to junior staff, the way people behaved when they believed no one important was watching. Those things revealed the real health of an organization. Raymond learned that belief many years earlier, from someone who had shaped the way he viewed the world, his grandfather. The old man had been a quiet but wise figure in Raymond's childhood. He ran a small hardware store in a modest neighborhood outside Dallas. It wasn't a large business, but it supported the family for many years. Young Raymond spent many afternoons there after school. He would sit behind the counter doing homework, while his grandfather helped customers find tools, paint supplies, or repair parts for their homes. The store never felt rushed. People came in not just to buy things, but to talk. Neighbors shared stories about their families. Contractors discussed upcoming projects. Retired workers stopped by simply to pass time and enjoy conversation. Raymond watched how his grandfather treated every person who walked through the door. It didn't matter if someone bought a single nail or a full set of equipment. Everyone received the same respect. One evening, after closing the shop, Raymond asked a question that had been on his mind. "Grandpa," he said, while helping sweep the floor, "how do you know which people you can trust?" The old man leaned against the counter and smiled thoughtfully. "That's easy," he replied. "You watch how they treat people who can't do anything for them." Raymond frowned slightly. "I don't understand." His grandfather chuckled softly. "Money doesn't show you who people are," he explained. "Sometimes money hides the truth." The words stayed with Raymond long after that conversation ended. Years later, when Raymond built his own company, he tried to carry that lesson into every decision he made. He wanted his organization to be a place where respect mattered, where employees treated each other with dignity, where success didn't turn people arrogant. For many years, Raymond believed that vision was working. But recently, something had begun to trouble him. At first, the signs were small. A message sent anonymously through the company feedback system, then another. A few quiet resignations from newer employees who left without giving clear explanations. Human resources reports mentioned minor workplace concerns. Nothing serious on the surface. But Raymond had built his success by noticing patterns others overlooked. And slowly, those small signals began forming a picture he didn't like. Some employees hinted that certain managers behaved differently depending on who they were speaking to, respectful toward executives, dismissive toward people they believed held lower status. One report mentioned that a temporary worker had been treated poorly by a department supervisor. Another suggested some staff members mocked visitors who didn't appear wealthy or professional. None of these incidents appeared major when examined individually, but together they raised a troubling question. Was the culture inside his company changing? Late one evening, long after most employees had gone home, Raymond sat alone in his office on the top floor of the headquarters building. The city lights outside the tall windows shimmered against the dark sky. Dallas at night looked peaceful from that height. Raymond leaned back in his chair and reviewed the latest report again. The words on the screen were simple. Employee feedback, workplace conduct, internal concerns. Yet the feeling they left in his mind was heavy. He closed the laptop slowly and stared out at the skyline. Somewhere below, cars moved along the streets like streams of light. Raymond folded his hands together. If the culture inside his company truly had a problem, reports alone would never reveal the full truth. People behaved differently when they believed leadership was watching. Boardroom discussions often produced polished answers, but real character appeared in ordinary moments. Moments when people believed no one important was around. Raymond stood and walked toward the window. His reflection stared back at him in the glass. Perfect suit, CEO posture, a man whose presence instantly changed the behavior of everyone around him. And suddenly a thought crossed his mind, a simple but powerful idea. What if he removed that influence entirely? What if he entered the company in a way that no one would recognize? No title, no reputation, no reason for anyone to treat him differently than they would treat any stranger. The thought stayed with him for several minutes. At first, it sounded almost absurd, a CEO pretending to be someone else. But the longer Raymond considered it, the more the idea made sense. If he truly wanted to understand the culture inside his company, he would have to see it without the protection of his position. Raymond slowly returned to his desk. The office was silent, except for the faint hum of the building's ventilation system. He sat down, resting his elbows on the polished surface of the desk. Then he spoke quietly to himself. What if no one knew who I was? The question Raymond had whispered in his office did not disappear when he left the building that night. If anything, it followed him home. The drive from downtown Dallas to his property outside the city usually helped him clear his mind. The quiet roads and wide Texas landscape gave him time to think through business decisions before the next day began. But that evening, his thoughts kept returning to the same idea. What if no one knew who he was? Raymond pulled into the long driveway leading to his modern home. The property sat on several acres of land, surrounded by tall trees that created a sense of distance from the noise of the city. Most people assumed a billionaire's home would feel lively and full of activity. Raymond's house was the opposite. Quiet, orderly, minimal. Inside, the lighting was soft and the rooms were spacious, but there were few unnecessary decorations. Raymond preferred calm environments where he could think clearly. He set his keys down on the kitchen counter and poured himself a glass of water. Normally, he would review financial updates or read industry reports before going to bed, but tonight, he walked straight to the large window overlooking the dark Texas landscape. His reflection appeared faintly in the glass. The same polished image everyone inside the company recognized. Suit, tie, perfect posture, a presence that carried authority the moment he entered a room. And suddenly, Raymond realized something important. That image prevented him from ever seeing the company honestly. The moment employees recognized him, their behavior changed. Conversations became careful. Attitudes became respectful. Problems disappeared. But those reactions were influenced by his title, not by the real character of the people around him. Raymond placed the glass down slowly. If he wanted the truth, he needed to remove the one thing that shaped everyone's behavior, his identity. The next morning, Raymond began preparing for something no CEO in his position would normally consider. He started with privacy. No board members were informed. No executive assistants were told. No internal emails mentioned his plan. The fewer people who knew about the experiment, the more accurate the results would be. Raymond contacted a small theatrical makeup artist he had worked with years earlier during a company promotional project. The person believed Raymond simply wanted help creating a temporary disguise for a personal research project. Within 2 days, the basic materials were ready. Simple clothing, old shoes, items that would help change his appearance without drawing attention. But Raymond didn't want the disguise to look theatrical. It needed to appear real. He drove to several thrift stores in neighborhoods far from his usual routine. Inside one small shop, he found a pair of faded jeans that looked worn from years of use. The fabric felt rough, and the color had faded unevenly from repeated washing. He added a wrinkled jacket with frayed edges. The sleeves were slightly too long, which helped create the impression of clothing that had been worn for a long time, without proper fit. Raymond studied himself in a mirror inside the store. The difference was already noticeable. Without his usual tailored clothing, he looked like an ordinary man with little attention to appearance. But he knew the disguise required more than clothes. A beard helped change the shape of his face. His hair was allowed to grow slightly longer than usual. Small details altered the way people perceived him. Still, Raymond understood something else mattered even more. Posture. For years, he had walked through rooms with the confident posture of someone who led an organization. Shoulders straight, head level, purpose in every step. That presence alone could reveal his identity to anyone paying attention. So Raymond practiced something new. He spent time adjusting the way he walked. Slower movements, slightly lowered shoulders, a tired posture that suggested someone who had spent long days moving through the city. The first few attempts felt strange. His reflection looked unfamiliar, but gradually, the character became more convincing. Next came the backpack. Raymond chose an old bag that showed signs of heavy use. Inside it, he placed a few ordinary items: a folded newspaper, a water bottle, some notebooks. Nothing valuable, nothing that would suggest wealth or authority. Just the belongings someone might carry while moving from place to place throughout the day. A few days later, Raymond took another step to ensure the experiment remained private. He rented a modest apartment inside Dallas. The space was small compared to his usual living environment. Plain furniture, basic kitchen, simple bedroom. But the location was perfect. close enough to his company headquarters that he could walk there each morning. That detail mattered. People who appeared homeless rarely arrived in luxury vehicles. Raymond wanted the story his appearance told to feel believable. The night before the experiment began, Raymond stood alone inside the apartment. The worn jacket rested on a chair. The faded jeans lay folded beside it. His backpack sat near the door. Across the room hung one final reminder of his real life, a perfectly pressed suit. Raymond looked at it for a long moment. For years, that suit had represented everything he had built: power, success, responsibility. Tomorrow, none of that would matter. Tomorrow he would walk into his own company as someone nobody respected. The thought carried a mixture of curiosity and tension. He understood exactly what he might witness: people revealing attitudes they normally hid, employees behaving differently when they believed the person in front of them had no influence. But that was the truth he wanted to see. Raymond picked up the worn jacket and slipped it over his shoulder. The fabric felt heavier than his usual clothing. The mirror near the wall showed a completely different man. Someone tired, someone ordinary, someone easy to overlook. Raymond studied the reflection quietly. This version of himself would walk through the company doors without recognition, without protection, without the authority that usually shaped every interaction. For a moment he thought again about his grandfather's words. Money doesn't show you who people are. Sometimes money hides the truth. Raymond adjusted the backpack strap across his shoulder. If those words were true, then tomorrow he would finally see what money had been hiding inside his own company. He turned off the apartment light and stepped outside into the quiet Dallas night. The city lights stretched across the horizon. Cars moved steadily along distant roads. Life continued as usual for everyone else. But Raymond knew something unusual was about to begin. Tomorrow morning, he would walk into the headquarters building he owned, not as the CEO, not as a billionaire, but as someone the world usually ignored. And the truth he discovered might change everything. Morning arrived quietly over Dallas. The first rays of sunlight stretched across the city, reflecting from glass buildings and long rows of office windows. Traffic gradually filled the streets as workers headed toward another busy day in one of Texas's fastest-growing business centers. Inside the small apartment he had rented for the experiment, Raymond stood in front of a narrow mirror mounted beside the door. The reflection staring back at him looked nothing like the man employees normally saw walking through the executive floor. The worn jeans hung loosely around his legs. The wrinkled jacket rested unevenly across his shoulder. His beard had grown just enough to change the shape of his face, and his hair looked slightly unkempt. Most importantly, his posture had changed. Raymond practiced it again. His shoulders lowered slightly, his steps slower, less confident, less noticeable. He picked up the backpack resting on the floor and slipped it over one shoulder. For a moment he simply stood there, studying the image in the mirror. This man would walk through the same doors Raymond had entered thousands of times. But today, the experience would be completely different. Raymond took a slow breath. "This is the only way to see the truth," he said quietly to himself. Then he opened the apartment door and stepped outside. The morning air felt cool as he began the short walk toward the company headquarters. Several people passed him on the sidewalk. Most of them were focused on their phones or conversations. A few glanced briefly in his direction. Then they continued walking without another look. Raymond noticed the difference immediately. When he normally walked through the city, people recognized him quickly. Some greeted him respectfully. Others stepped aside politely. But now, he blended into the background of the street, invisible. And the experiment had only just begun. 20 minutes later, the tall glass building that housed his company came into view. Raymond slowed his pace slightly. From across the street, the headquarters looked just as impressive as it always had. Employees entered through the wide glass doors carrying coffee cups and laptop bags. Security staff monitored the entrance desk inside the lobby. Everything appeared normal. But Raymond knew something important. Today, he was not approaching the building as its owner. He was approaching it as someone most people would ignore. He crossed the street and walked toward the entrance. A group of employees passed him on their way inside. One woman glanced in his direction briefly. Her expression tightened slightly before she turned away and continued walking. Another employee slowed his step just enough to look Raymond up and down. Then he shook his head quietly and walked inside without speaking. Raymond kept moving. His posture remained calm and neutral. He had expected these reactions. Still, seeing them firsthand felt different. Just a few more steps brought him near the glass doors. Before he could reach them, a voice called out from inside the lobby. "Hey, hold on." The security guard behind the desk had noticed him. The man stood up and walked toward the entrance with a serious expression. Raymond stopped near the door. The guard opened it slightly and stepped outside. "This building is for employees and scheduled visitors," the guard said firmly. Raymond kept his tone calm. "I was hoping to ask about temporary work," he replied. The guard frowned. "Temporary work?" he repeated. "Yes," Raymond said gently. "Maintenance, cleaning, anything available." The guard crossed his arms. "You need to contact human resources for that," he replied. Raymond nodded politely. "I was hoping someone might point me in the right direction." The guard glanced toward the busy lobby behind him. Several employees had slowed down while passing through the entrance. They watched the conversation quietly. The guard sighed impatiently. "Look," he said, lowering his voice slightly. "This is a corporate office. We can't have people wandering around here." Raymond understood exactly what the man meant. He was being judged based entirely on appearance. Before Raymond could respond, another voice spoke from behind him. "Actually, he's with me." Both men turned. A woman stood a few steps away holding a cardboard tray with 2 cups of coffee. Raymond recognized her immediately. She had been approaching the building from the sidewalk behind him. Her expression was calm, but confident. The security guard looked confused. "With you?" he asked. She nodded once. "Yes." The guard hesitated. For a moment he seemed unsure whether to argue. Finally he stepped aside. "Fine," he muttered. "Just don't cause any problems." Raymond walked through the doors beside her. The lobby felt familiar, but different at the same time. Normally, employees greeted Raymond the moment he entered the building. Today, nobody recognized him. Several people looked in his direction with curiosity. Others avoided looking at him completely. The woman guided him toward a quiet corner near the large windows. She set the coffee tray down on a nearby table. Then she turned to face him. "You weren't actually planning to argue with security, were you?" she asked, with a small smile. Raymond chuckled softly. "I was hoping someone might give me a chance to explain." She studied him thoughtfully for a moment. Then she picked up one of the coffee cups and handed it to him. "You look like you might need this more than I do." Raymond blinked slightly in surprise. Most people had ignored him since he began walking toward the building. But this woman had stopped. She had spoken to him, and now she was offering him coffee. "Thank you," Raymond said quietly. She smiled warmly. "No problem." Raymond wrapped his hands around the cup. The warmth felt comforting in the cool air of the lobby. "Why help me?" he asked after a moment. She shrugged lightly. "My grandmother always used to say something." Raymond raised an eyebrow. "What was that?" She smiled again. "Treat people right, even when nobody is watching." Raymond felt those words settle deep in his thoughts, because at this moment, nobody in the building believed he was anyone important. To them, he was just a stranger, someone easy to overlook. Yet she had chosen kindness without hesitation. Raymond took a careful sip of the coffee. It tasted better than he expected. "Thank you again," he said. She nodded casually. "Everybody deserves a good morning." For a few seconds, neither of them spoke. Employees continued moving through the lobby behind them. Some glanced curiously at Raymond. Others pretended not to notice him at all. Finally, she picked up her bag from the table. "Well," she said, "I should get upstairs before my manager starts wondering where I am." Raymond nodded. "Of course." She turned toward the elevator area. After a few steps, she looked back briefly. "Good luck," she added. Then she disappeared into the flow of employees heading toward the office floors. Raymond remained standing near the window. The cup of coffee warmed his hands, and for the first time since the experiment began, he felt something unexpected: hope. Because in the middle of a building filled with people who had barely noticed him, one person had. Raymond looked toward the elevator doors where she had just disappeared. Then he took another sip of the coffee and allowed a small smile to appear. "This test," he thought quietly, might reveal far more than I expected. Raymond stood near the large window in the lobby for several seconds after the woman walked toward the elevators. The warmth of the coffee cup remained in his hands. Employees continued moving through the lobby in steady waves as the workday fully began. Some walked past him without even turning their heads. Others gave brief glances before quickly looking away. It was a strange experience. For years, Raymond had entered this building with people greeting him the moment he stepped inside. Conversations paused when he walked through the room. Managers stood straighter. Assistants rushed forward to ask if he needed anything. Today, none of that happened. Today, he was simply another man standing near the wall, invisible again. Raymond took another sip of the coffee and quietly watched the lobby. The security guard, who had stopped him earlier, had returned to the desk near the entrance. From time to time, the guard looked in Raymond's direction, still unsure whether letting him inside had been the right decision. Raymond didn't blame him. From the guard's perspective, a man dressed like this didn't belong inside a corporate office tower. The truth was, Raymond had built this building. Yet in this moment, appearance mattered more than ownership. Several employees stepped out of the elevators and began walking toward the entrance. Two of them slowed slightly when they noticed Raymond still standing near the window. One leaned closer to the other and whispered something. They both glanced in Raymond's direction before continuing toward the exit. Raymond noticed the exchange, but kept his expression neutral. Every reaction was part of the experiment. Just then, the elevator doors opened again. The woman stepped out. Raymond hadn't expected to see her so soon. She walked directly toward him with the same calm confidence she had shown earlier. "I thought you might still be here," she said. Raymond raised an eyebrow slightly. "You came back?" She shrugged. "Well, I couldn't exactly leave you standing in the lobby all morning." Raymond smiled faintly. "That's very kind of you." She studied him for a moment, as if trying to understand his situation better. "Did the security guard give you trouble again?" she asked. Raymond glanced briefly toward the entrance desk. "Not exactly," he replied. "He just seemed unsure about letting me stay." She nodded. "That's not surprising. Corporate offices can be pretty strict about who they allow inside." Raymond took another sip of the coffee. "Still," he said thoughtfully, "you didn't have to help me earlier." She leaned casually against the nearby table. "Helping someone isn't usually complicated," she said. "It's just a decision." Raymond considered that answer. In the corporate world, he often dealt with complicated strategies, negotiations, and long-term planning. Yet the way she described kindness made it sound simple, a decision, nothing more. She glanced around the lobby briefly. "So," she said, "what exactly were you hoping to find here?" Raymond chose his words carefully. "I was hoping someone might give me a chance to do small work around the building," he explained. "Cleaning, carrying supplies, anything useful." She crossed her arms thoughtfully. "Well, the company does bring in temporary help sometimes," she said, "but it usually goes through specific departments." Raymond nodded. "That's what the guard suggested, too." For a moment she remained quiet, thinking. Then she spoke again. "Come with me." Raymond looked slightly surprised. "Where?" "To one of the office floors," she replied. "I can at least ask around and see if anyone needs help today." Raymond hesitated for a second. "Are you sure that won't cause problems for you?" She shook her head. "No." Then she smiled lightly. "Besides, my grandmother would probably scold me if I walked away from someone who needed help." Raymond felt a familiar curiosity. "You mentioned your grandmother earlier," he said. "Yes," she replied. "She raised most of us in the family." Raymond tilted his head slightly. "She sounds like someone who believed strongly in treating people well." The woman nodded immediately. "Oh, absolutely." Then she repeated the same words Raymond had heard earlier that morning. "Treat people right, even when nobody is watching." The sentence felt different this time. Raymond had heard it before in the lobby. But now, standing inside the building he owned while dressed like someone with nothing, the meaning carried even more weight. Because nobody in this building believed Raymond was important, and yet she continued treating him with patience and respect. Raymond looked at the coffee cup in his hands. That small gesture alone had already changed the way he felt about the experiment. "I think your grandmother gave you very good advice," he said quietly. She smiled. She usually does. At that moment, two employees passed behind them on their way toward the elevators. One of them slowed when he noticed Raymond standing there. The man's eyes moved from Raymond's worn jacket to the backpack hanging from his shoulder. His expression tightened slightly before he continued walking. Raymond noticed the reaction immediately. So did the woman. She shook her head lightly. "Some people in offices like this forget where they came from," she said. Raymond raised an eyebrow. "You've noticed that too?" "Of course," she replied. "Titles and salaries can make people think they're more important than others." Raymond considered her words carefully. This conversation alone was already revealing something interesting. She spoke honestly, without fear, without trying to impress anyone. In fact, she had no idea she was speaking to the person who ran the entire company, and yet she still defended the idea of treating everyone equally. Raymond finished the last sip of his coffee. He placed the empty cup gently on the nearby table. "Thank you for helping me," he said again. She waved a hand casually. "It's really not a big deal." Then she nodded toward the elevator area. "Come on." Raymond adjusted the strap of his backpack. Together they began walking across the lobby toward the elevators. Employees moving through the building glanced at them as they passed. Some looked confused. Others looked curious. A few seemed uncomfortable. Raymond noticed every reaction. The elevator doors opened with a soft sound. Several employees were already standing inside. The woman stepped in first. Raymond followed quietly behind her. For a brief moment, the elevator fell silent. Every person inside glanced toward Raymond. Their eyes moved over his clothing, his backpack, his posture. Raymond could almost feel their thoughts forming. Why is he here? Does he belong in this building? Should someone say something? The elevator doors closed, and Raymond realized something important. His real experiment had finally begun. The elevator began its quiet ascent through the building. Inside the small space, the air felt noticeably tense. Raymond stood near the back wall, with his backpack resting against his shoulder. The woman stood beside him, holding her laptop bag while watching the floor numbers slowly rise above the door. The other employees inside the elevator tried to pretend nothing unusual was happening, but their eyes told a different story. One man in a gray suit glanced toward Raymond briefly, then quickly turned his attention to his phone. Another employee looked at Raymond's worn jacket before shifting slightly farther away. Raymond noticed every movement. These small reactions were exactly what he had come to observe. The elevator stopped on the 12th floor. The doors opened, and two employees stepped out without saying a word. As the doors closed again, the remaining passengers became even quieter. The elevator continued upward. Raymond kept his posture relaxed, though his mind remained alert. He had spent years studying how people behaved during negotiations and business meetings. Observing human behavior was one of the reasons his company had grown so successfully. But this was different. Today, he wasn't watching executives in conference rooms. He was watching how ordinary employees treated someone they believed had no influence at all. The elevator stopped again. This time the woman stepped forward. "This is our floor," she said calmly. Raymond followed her. As the doors opened, the office space beyond the elevator was bright and organized. Long rows of desks filled the room, each one equipped with computer screens, paperwork, and small personal items employees kept nearby. Phones rang occasionally. Keyboards clicked steadily. Employees spoke quietly to one another while reviewing reports or answering messages. At first, the activity continued normally. Then, people began noticing Raymond. A few heads turned. One employee sitting near the entrance looked openly confused. Another leaned toward a co-worker and whispered something. Raymond could hear faint laughter a few desks away. The woman continued walking confidently across the office floor, as if nothing unusual was happening. Raymond stayed close behind her. As they passed one group of employees, a man leaned back in his chair and stared openly. "Well," he said loudly enough for others nearby to hear, "I didn't realize the company started offering building tours." Several people nearby chuckled. Raymond stopped walking. He kept his expression neutral, but he carefully observed the reactions around him. The woman stopped too. She turned slowly and faced the group of employees who had laughed. "That wasn't funny," she said firmly. Her voice wasn't loud, but it carried enough authority to silence the conversation immediately. The man who had spoken earlier straightened slightly in his chair. "I was just joking," he muttered. She crossed her arms. "Then try making better jokes." The surrounding desks became quiet. A few employees quickly returned their attention to their computer screens. Others looked slightly embarrassed. Raymond studied the moment closely. In many workplaces, people remained silent when someone mocked another person, but she had chosen to respond immediately, without hesitation, without worrying how it might affect her reputation. She turned back toward Raymond. "Don't worry about them," she said calmly. Raymond gave a small nod. "I've seen worse," he replied. That answer made her smile faintly. "Well, hopefully the rest of the day goes better." She guided Raymond toward a quieter section of the office, near a row of unused desks. "Sometimes temporary workers help with organizing files or moving equipment," she explained. "I'll check with the supervisor later." Raymond nodded. "I appreciate that." For several minutes, Raymond remained near the empty workspace, while she returned to her own desk across the room. From this position, he could see most of the office floor. Employees moved between desks carrying folders or speaking quietly to colleagues, but every now and then, someone glanced toward him. Some of the looks were curious, others were clearly judgmental. Raymond kept his posture relaxed. Inside his backpack was a small notebook. Carefully, without drawing attention, he removed it and opened to a blank page. Then he began writing short notes, simple observations, time, location, behavior. He didn't write names. That would come later. For now, he simply recorded what he saw. One employee walked past him without acknowledging his presence. Another gave him a brief, polite nod. A third glanced at him with clear annoyance before walking away. Raymond wrote each reaction down calmly. The notebook slowly began filling with details. He had expected some employees to behave this way. Still, witnessing it firsthand confirmed something important. The culture inside the company was not the same everywhere. Some people treated others with quiet respect. Others revealed a very different attitude the moment they believed someone had no status. After about 20 minutes, the woman returned from her desk. She carried a folder in one hand. "Sorry about that," she said. "Morning meetings can be busy around here." Raymond closed the notebook quickly and slipped it back into the backpack. "No problem," he replied. She looked around the office floor briefly. "You're handling things okay so far?" Raymond smiled slightly. "I'm learning a lot." That answer made her laugh. "Well, you'll definitely see all kinds of personalities in an office like this." Raymond looked across the room again. Some employees were now pretending not to notice him at all. Others still glanced in his direction occasionally. Every reaction revealed something new. He turned back to her. "I'm grateful you gave me a chance to come upstairs," he said. She shrugged casually. "Everyone deserves a chance." Raymond considered that sentence carefully. For most people inside the company, opportunity depended on resumes, credentials, and experience. But she believed opportunity started with something simpler: respect. Raymond looked around the office floor one more time. This was the environment he had built. These were the people who represented his company every day. And now he was finally seeing how some of them behaved when they believed leadership wasn't watching. Raymond adjusted the strap of his backpack. The experiment had only just begun, and already the truth inside the building was starting to reveal itself. By midday, the office floor had settled into its usual rhythm. The early morning rush of meetings had slowed. Phones rang less frequently, and the quiet clicking of keyboards filled the open workspace. Raymond remained near the unused desk area where the woman had asked him to wait earlier. From time to time, employees passed by carrying folders or coffee cups. Most ignored him completely. A few glanced at him with quiet curiosity. But the laughter from earlier had disappeared. Word seemed to have spread quickly through the office that someone had already spoken up about the comment. Raymond noticed that too. Workplaces often revealed their character through small moments like that. Sometimes it only took one person willing to stand up for basic decency to shift the behavior of an entire room. Raymond checked the time on the small clock mounted on the wall. Nearly noon. Employees began standing from their desks, stretching after hours of sitting. Some gathered their phones and wallets before heading toward the elevators. Others discussed lunch plans quietly with coworkers. Raymond understood what was happening. Lunch break. For most employees, it was a chance to step outside, clear their minds, and relax for a short time before returning to work. Raymond decided to do the same. He quietly slipped his notebook back into his backpack and walked toward the elevator area. No one stopped him. No one asked where he was going. In fact, most employees didn't acknowledge him at all. The elevator ride down to the lobby passed without conversation. Two employees inside the elevator kept glancing at Raymond briefly, before returning their attention to their phones. Raymond didn't mind. Their reactions were becoming familiar now. When the doors opened on the ground floor, Raymond stepped out and walked toward the building entrance. Outside, the Texas sun had climbed high in the sky. The warm midday air filled the streets of downtown Dallas. Employees from nearby buildings walked along the sidewalks, carrying lunch bags or drinks from nearby restaurants. Raymond crossed the street and found an empty bench near the entrance plaza. He sat down slowly, placing the backpack beside him. For a moment, he simply watched the city. Cars passed steadily along the road. People hurried along the sidewalks. Some laughed while talking with coworkers. Others walked alone, focused on their phones. The world outside the building felt very different from the quiet tension Raymond had observed upstairs. After several minutes, Raymond leaned back slightly against the bench. The experiment had already revealed several things. Some employees ignored him. Some judged him instantly. But one person had chosen something different: kindness. Just as Raymond began considering his notes from the morning, a familiar voice spoke nearby. "I had a feeling you might come out here for lunch." Raymond looked up. The woman stood a few steps away, holding two small paper bags. Raymond smiled slightly. "You found me." She walked over and sat down beside him on the bench. "Well," she said with a light laugh, "there aren't many quiet places around here during lunch." She handed him one of the paper bags. Raymond looked surprised. "What's this?" "Lunch," she replied casually. Raymond opened the bag carefully. Inside was a sandwich wrapped in paper and a small napkin. The smell alone made him realize how hungry he was. "You didn't have to do this," he said. She shrugged. "It's just a sandwich." Raymond examined it briefly before taking a bite. The flavor made him pause. "This is really good," he said. She smiled proudly. "It should be." Raymond looked curious. "Why's that?" "Because I made it myself." Raymond raised his eyebrows. "You cooked this?" "Of course," she replied. "My aunt taught me that store-bought sandwiches are never as good as homemade ones." Raymond took another bite. "Well, your aunt knows what she's talking about." She laughed. "I'll let her know someone important agrees." Raymond nearly smiled at that phrase. If only she knew who she was actually speaking to. They sat quietly for a few moments, while Raymond finished another bite of the sandwich. The conversation felt relaxed, natural, very different from the tense reactions he had experienced earlier in the office. After a moment, she leaned back slightly on the bench. She said, "Where are you from?" Raymond considered the question carefully. He couldn't reveal too much. "Not far from here," he answered. "Texas?" "Yes." She nodded. "That makes sense. You have that calm way of talking people around here have." Raymond chuckled softly. "I'll take that as a compliment." "It is," she said. Then she took a small sip from her drink before continuing. "My family grew up here in Dallas." Raymond listened carefully. "We lived in the southern part of the city," she explained. "Not far from where my grandmother's house still is." Raymond leaned forward slightly. "What was it like growing up there?" Her face brightened immediately. "Oh, it was lively." She began describing the neighborhood with clear affection. Summer evenings where music played from open windows. Families cooking outside, while neighbors gathered nearby. Kids running across yards, while older relatives sat on front porches telling stories. Raymond could almost picture the scene. "It sounds like everyone knew each other," he said. "They did," she replied. "My grandmother always believed a neighborhood should feel like a family." Raymond nodded thoughtfully. "That's a rare thing these days." "Maybe," she said, "but it taught us something important." Raymond raised an eyebrow. "What's that?" "That success doesn't mean much if you forget where you came from." Raymond felt those words settle deeply. For someone who had built a billion-dollar company, he understood the truth behind that statement very well. She continued speaking about her upbringing, family gatherings, church on Sunday mornings, barbecue cookouts that lasted until late evening, moments where older relatives shared advice about life and responsibility. Raymond listened quietly. The warmth in her voice made it clear how much those experiences had shaped her. Finally, she looked at him again. "What about you?" she asked. Raymond paused. His story was far more complicated than the version he could safely tell. "I grew up learning that character matters," he said carefully, "more than money or titles." She smiled. "Sounds like good advice." Raymond nodded slowly. "It was." For a moment, Neither of them spoke. The sounds of traffic and conversation filled the air around them. Then she looked toward the office building across the street. "You know something?" she said. "What?" "You don't seem like most people who come looking for work like this." Raymond raised an eyebrow slightly. "How so?" She thought about it for a moment. "You listen more than you talk," she said. "That's unusual." Raymond laughed quietly. "Maybe I'm just curious." "Curiosity is good," she replied. Then she stood up slowly, brushing a few crumbs from her hands. "Lunch break is almost over." Raymond looked down at the sandwich wrapper in his hand. "Thank you for this," he said sincerely. She waved her hand casually. "It was nothing." Raymond stood as well, lifting his backpack. As they began walking back toward the building entrance together, Raymond felt something unexpected growing in his thoughts. This experiment had started as a way to test his employee, but now something else was happening. Something he hadn't planned. Because the more time he spent talking with her, the more he realized something important. Inside a company full of people focused on status and appearances, she carried the kind of character he had always hoped to build into the culture of his organization. And Raymond began to wonder if this simple act of kindness was only the beginning of something much bigger. The days that followed Raymond's first visit inside the company began to settle into a quiet routine. Each morning he woke early in the small apartment he had rented for the experiment. The room was simple, with just enough furniture to meet basic needs. It was very different from the large home he normally returned to after work. But Raymond didn't mind. In fact, the simplicity helped him focus. He dressed the same way each morning. The worn jeans, the wrinkled jacket, the backpack resting against the wall beside the door. Before leaving the apartment, he would study his reflection briefly in the mirror. The image staring back at him still felt unfamiliar. But that unfamiliar image was the key to the entire experiment. Once satisfied with the disguise, Raymond stepped outside and began the short walk toward the company headquarters. Downtown Dallas always seemed full of energy during the morning hours. Office workers hurried toward buildings, carrying coffee cups and briefcases. Traffic moved steadily along the wide streets, while the early sunlight reflected from rows of tall windows across the skyline. Raymond walked calmly through the flow of people. No one recognized him. No one greeted him, and that was exactly what he needed. When he reached the building entrance each morning, the security guard usually glanced up from the desk. The guard had stopped questioning Raymond after the first day. Now he simply nodded politely. Raymond returned the nod and continued inside. The woman often arrived around the same time. Sometimes she greeted Raymond with a cheerful good morning before heading toward the elevators. Other mornings, she was already inside the building, working. Either way, Raymond always noticed her presence, but most of his attention remained focused on observing the people around him. As the days passed, Raymond began exploring different floors of the company. He moved quietly between departments whenever he could, always carrying the appearance of someone doing temporary tasks or waiting for instructions. Each floor revealed something new. In one department, a middle-aged employee noticed Raymond standing near a hallway. Instead of ignoring him, the man offered a friendly greeting. "Morning," the employee said. Raymond nodded politely. "Good morning." The man paused for a moment. "You looking for someone?" "I'm helping with small tasks around the building," Raymond replied carefully. The employee pointed toward a nearby desk. "Well, if you ever need directions, feel free to ask." Raymond appreciated the gesture. Small moments like that reminded him that kindness still existed inside the company. But other interactions revealed very different attitudes. Later that same day, Raymond walked through another section of the office where several employees were gathered around a desk reviewing documents. One of them noticed Raymond immediately. The employee leaned back slightly in his chair and stared openly. "Lost?" the man asked with a smirk. Raymond kept his voice calm. "No, just passing through." The man exchanged amused looks with his coworkers. "Pretty big place to wander around," he said. A few quiet laughs followed. Raymond didn't respond. He simply continued walking down the hallway. Behind him, the laughter faded quickly. Moments like that went directly into the small notebook inside his backpack. Raymond recorded everything, not names yet, just observations. How people reacted, what they said, how others responded. Some employees treated him with quiet respect. Some behaved with arrogance, the moment they believed he had no status, and many simply acted as though he didn't exist at all. Indifference. That reaction fascinated Raymond almost as much as cruelty, because indifference revealed something deeper about workplace culture. It showed how easily people ignored someone they believed had nothing to offer. On the third day of the experiment, Raymond visited another department on one of the upper floors. This section of the office appeared calmer than the others. Employees worked quietly at their desks while reviewing reports on their screens. Raymond paused near a supply cabinet, pretending to organize a stack of empty boxes. A younger employee approached the cabinet a few minutes later. The man hesitated briefly when he saw Raymond standing there. Then he spoke politely. "Excuse me," he said. Raymond stepped aside immediately. Of course. The employee retrieved a folder from the cabinet. As he turned to leave, he paused again. "You're new here, right?" Raymond nodded. "Yes." "Well," the man said, offering a small smile. "Welcome." The conversation lasted only a few seconds, but Raymond wrote it down later, because those moments mattered. They revealed the true character of individuals inside the company. Each evening, Raymond returned to the apartment and reviewed the notes he had collected during the day. The notebook pages slowly filled with details, conversations, reactions, patterns. Some departments showed signs of strong teamwork. Employees helped each other without hesitation. Others appeared far more competitive. In those areas, people seemed focused only on their own success. By the fourth day, Raymond noticed something else. Word had quietly spread through parts of the building about the temporary worker walking between departments. Some employees now looked at him with curiosity rather than suspicion. A few even asked casual questions. One afternoon, a woman working near the reception area on another floor called out to him, "Hey, do you know where the mailroom is?" Raymond pointed toward the hallway behind her. "Second door on the left." She smiled. "Thanks." Moments like that showed Raymond something encouraging. Not everyone judged him based on appearance. Some people simply treated him as another person in the building. Still, the contrast between different employees remained clear. On the fifth day of the experiment, Raymond stood near a window overlooking the busy Dallas streets below. He watched the traffic move steadily between buildings, while reviewing the notes he had written earlier. The experiment had already revealed a wide range of personalities inside the company. Kindness, arrogance, indifference, all existing under the same corporate roof. Raymond closed the notebook slowly. For years, he had believed he understood the culture of his organization. But seeing the company through this new perspective was teaching him something far more valuable than any management report. It showed him the true faces of the people who represented his company every day. And the week of observation was only beginning. By the middle of the week, Raymond's presence inside the building had become almost familiar. Not important, not respected, but familiar. Employees who passed him in the hallways no longer reacted with the same curiosity they had shown during the first day. Some barely looked in his direction at all. Others had grown used to seeing the quiet man with a backpack moving between floors. For Raymond, that change made the experiment even more valuable. The less attention people paid to him, the more naturally they behaved. And natural behavior revealed the truth. Yet among all those passing faces inside the company, one person continued treating Raymond the same way she had on the very first morning, with simple kindness. Most mornings, she greeted him near the lobby. "Good morning," she would say, as she stepped through the entrance doors with her coffee in hand. Raymond always returned the greeting with a small nod. "Good morning." Sometimes they rode the elevator together. Other times, she headed straight toward her desk, while Raymond moved through the building observing different departments. But their conversations gradually became more frequent. One morning she noticed Raymond sitting on the bench outside the building before work began. She walked over and held up a coffee cup. "Thought you might want one," she said. Raymond looked at the cup, surprised. "You brought this for me?" "Well," she replied casually, "you helped me find the mailroom yesterday." Raymond laughed quietly. "That hardly seems like something worth repaying." "Maybe not," she said, handing him the cup anyway. "But it's still good to say thank you." Raymond accepted the coffee. "Then, thank you." They sat on the bench for a few minutes, while the morning sun slowly climbed above the buildings across the street. Employees continued walking past them toward the entrance, but Raymond hardly paid attention to them during those moments. The conversation felt easy, unforced. "So," she asked one morning while stirring her coffee, "have you always done temporary work like this?" Raymond thought carefully before answering. "I've done many different kinds of work over the years," he said. "That sounds like an interesting story," she replied. Raymond smiled slightly. "Maybe someday I'll tell it." She laughed. "I'll remember that." Inside the building, their encounters continued in small moments. Raymond would pass her desk while observing another department. She would glance up from her computer and smile. "Still exploring?" she asked once. Raymond nodded. "Still learning." "About what?" "About people," he replied. That answer made her pause. "Have you learned anything useful yet?" Raymond considered the question. "Yes," he said. "Some people surprise you." She tilted her head slightly. "In a good way or a bad way?" Raymond met her eyes. "Both." Later that afternoon, Raymond walked through the hallway leading toward the elevators. He heard footsteps behind him. When he turned around, the woman was catching up. "You heading out already?" she asked. "Just taking a break," Raymond replied. She nodded toward the glass doors leading outside. "Walk with me." Raymond followed her out of the building. The evening sun was beginning to lower behind the tall buildings of downtown Dallas. The sidewalks were busy, with people leaving work for the day. They walked slowly along the street for several minutes without speaking. Finally, she broke the silence. "You know something?" she said. "What?" "You're a good listener." Raymond looked amused. "Is that unusual?" "Very," she replied immediately. "Most people spend more time waiting for their turn to talk than actually hearing what someone else says." Raymond chuckled softly. "I've always believed listening is how you learn the most." She glanced at him thoughtfully. "That's probably why you seem different." Raymond raised an eyebrow. "Different from who?" "From a lot of people I meet," she said. "In what way?" She thought about it for a moment. "You pay attention." Raymond felt a quiet satisfaction hearing those words. For years he had built his company by paying attention to details others ignored. But hearing that observation from someone who didn't know his position made it feel more genuine. They continued walking along the sidewalk. The warm Dallas air carried the sounds of traffic and conversation from nearby streets. After a while, she spoke again. "My grandmother used to say something about people who listen." Raymond smiled. "She sounds like someone who had a lot of good advice." "She did," the woman replied. "She believed that listening showed respect." Raymond nodded slowly. "That's a lesson many people forget." They walked another block before turning back toward the company building. As they approached the entrance again, the woman stopped near the same bench where they had eaten lunch earlier in the week. "You ever think about what kind of work you really want to do?" she asked suddenly. Raymond considered the question. The truth would have been difficult to explain. "I think everyone wants to feel useful," he said. "That's a good answer," she replied. Then she smiled. "You know, if anyone asks me about you, I'll tell them you work harder than some people with official job titles." Raymond laughed quietly. "I'm not sure the managers would agree with that." "Well," she said confidently, "they should." For a moment, neither of them spoke. The lights inside the office building began turning on. As the sky slowly darkened above Dallas, Raymond realized something during that quiet moment. What had started as a simple act of kindness on the first morning had slowly grown into something more meaningful. Trust, comfort, a friendship forming through small conversations and shared moments. And the most remarkable part of it all was that she still had no idea who he truly was. To her, Raymond was simply a quiet man who had appeared at the company looking for work. Nothing more. Yet she continued treating him with patience, curiosity, and respect. As they walked back toward the entrance together, Raymond felt something unexpected. The experiment had begun as a way to test his employees, but now it was becoming something else. Because the more time he spent talking with her, the more he realized that some of the most important lessons inside this company were not coming from reports or observations. They were coming from the person who had offered him a simple cup of coffee on the very first day. By the end of the week, Raymond had settled into a rhythm that almost felt natural. Each morning, he walked from the small apartment to the company building, wearing the same worn clothes and carrying the same backpack. Each day he moved quietly through the offices, observing employees, listening to conversations, and recording his thoughts in the small notebook hidden inside the bag. Each evening, He returned to the apartment and reviewed everything he had written. The notebook had grown thick with notes, pages filled with observations about behavior inside the company. Moments of kindness, moments of disrespect, moments where people revealed exactly who they were when they believed no one important was watching. From a business perspective, the experiment had already succeeded. Raymond had learned more about his company's culture in 5 days than most executives could learn in 5 years of reports and meetings. But another part of the experiment had begun to affect him in ways he had not expected. It had nothing to do with office politics, and everything to do with the woman who had offered him coffee on the first morning. Their conversations had become part of Raymond's daily routine. Some mornings they spoke briefly in the lobby before work began. Other days they passed each other in the hallway and exchanged a few words while employees rushed around them. Occasionally they walked outside together after the workday ended, talking about ordinary things while the city slowly settled into the evening. Those moments had started to matter more than Raymond expected. The more time he spent talking with her, the more he realized something about her character. She treated people the same way regardless of their position. It didn't matter if someone held an executive title or looked like a stranger wandering through the building. Respect was automatic. Kindness was natural. And that realization created a strange tension inside Raymond's mind, because every conversation they shared reminded him of something uncomfortable. She didn't know who he really was. To her, Raymond was simply a quiet man looking for temporary work. Someone with no authority, someone with no influence, someone with no power inside the company. And yet she continued treating him with honesty and patience. Raymond often wondered how that would change once the truth came out. One evening, after returning to the apartment, Raymond sat at the small kitchen table reviewing his notes. The city lights from Dallas shone faintly through the window across the room. He turned another page in the notebook. Observations from that afternoon filled the lines. A department supervisor who ignored a junior employee asking for help. A receptionist who greeted every visitor warmly. A manager who spoke politely to executives but dismissed temporary workers with impatience. Raymond closed the notebook slowly. The company culture clearly needed attention. Some employees represented the values he wanted the organization to stand for. Others did not. Those issues could be addressed later. What troubled Raymond more was the question he could no longer avoid. What would happen when she learned the truth? He leaned back in the chair and stared quietly at the ceiling. For the past week, every conversation between them had been honest from her side. She spoke openly about her family, her neighborhood, and the lessons she had learned growing up in Dallas. She had shared stories about her grandmother and the values she believed in. And through all those conversations, Raymond had said almost nothing about his real life. Every answer he gave had been carefully measured. Not a lie, exactly, but never the full truth. That realization began to bother him more each day, because the respect she showed him was genuine. And in a strange way, Raymond felt as though he was accepting that kindness while hiding something important. The next morning, Raymond arrived at the company building earlier than usual. The lobby was quiet. Only a few employees had arrived for the day. Raymond sat on the familiar bench outside the entrance, watching the sun rise between the buildings across the street. He was deep in thought when he heard footsteps approaching. The woman walked toward the entrance carrying her usual coffee. When she saw Raymond sitting there, she smiled. "Good morning," she said. "Good morning," Raymond replied. She sat down beside him on the bench. "You look like you've been thinking about something," she said. Raymond chuckled softly. "Is it that obvious?" "A little," she replied. "What's on your mind?" Raymond considered the question. For a moment, he almost told her the truth. But the experiment wasn't finished yet. Instead, he chose his words carefully. "I've been thinking about how people see each other," he said. She tilted her head slightly. "What do you mean?" Raymond gestured toward the building behind them. "In a place like this, people often judge each other quickly." "Based on titles?" she asked. "Sometimes," Raymond said. "Sometimes based on appearances." She nodded slowly. "That happens everywhere." Raymond looked at her. "But you didn't do that." She seemed confused. "Do what?" "Judge me," Raymond said. She laughed lightly. "Well, I figured you were just someone having a tough week." Raymond smiled. "That's a generous assumption." She shrugged. My grandmother always said something. Raymond already knew what she was about to say, but hearing it again still carried meaning. Treat people right, even when nobody is watching, she said. Raymond nodded slowly. That's a powerful way to live. For a moment they sat quietly, watching employees begin arriving for work. Then the woman glanced at the building entrance. Speaking of work, she said, standing up, I should head inside. Raymond stood as well. I'll see you upstairs. They walked through the doors together. Inside the lobby, the security guard greeted employees as they arrived. Raymond noticed something unusual. A notice had been placed on a digital display screen near the elevators. Employees passing by slowed down to read it. The woman stepped closer to the screen. What's this? She said. Raymond walked beside her and read the announcement. The message was simple. Company-wide meeting scheduled for Friday afternoon. Attendance required for all departments. The woman raised an eyebrow. That's unusual, she said. Raymond knew exactly what it meant. The meeting would bring every employee together in one place. The perfect moment to reveal the truth about the experiment. Raymond felt a quiet tension settle in his chest, because when that meeting arrived, everything would change. The employees would learn who he really was. The company would face the reality of what he had discovered, and most importantly, the woman who had treated him with kindness all week would finally learn the truth about the quiet man she had been sharing coffee and conversations with. Raymond glanced at the meeting notice one more time. The moment he had been preparing for was approaching faster than he expected. The morning of the company meeting arrived with a quiet stillness that Raymond had not felt during the rest of the week. Sunlight slowly filled the small apartment where he had been staying since the experiment began. The room looked exactly the same as it had every morning before. The simple table near the window, the narrow couch along the wall, the backpack resting on the chair beside the door. But something about the atmosphere felt different, because this morning marked the end of the experiment. Raymond stood near the window, looking out at the streets of Dallas as the city gradually came to life. Cars moved along the roads below. Pedestrians hurried toward office buildings carrying coffee and briefcases. Another ordinary workday was beginning. Yet Raymond knew this day would not be ordinary for anyone inside his company. Later that afternoon, every employee would gather in the conference hall. And when that moment arrived, the truth would finally be revealed. Raymond stepped away from the window and looked around the apartment. The worn jacket he had been wearing all week rested across the back of the chair. The faded jeans were folded neatly beside it. For several seconds, Raymond simply looked at them. Those clothes had allowed him to walk through his company unnoticed. They had given him the rare opportunity to see his organization through a completely different perspective. Through those worn clothes, Raymond had watched how people behaved when they believed someone had no influence. He had witnessed kindness. He had witnessed indifference. And he had witnessed behavior that troubled him deeply. Raymond walked toward the chair and picked up the jacket. The fabric felt rough in his hands. For the past several days, this jacket had helped hide his identity from everyone inside the company, including the woman who had become the most unexpected part of the entire experience. Raymond placed the jacket down carefully. His thoughts turned to her. From the very first morning, when she offered him coffee outside the building, her behavior had remained consistent. She treated him with patience, with curiosity, with respect. Never once did she question whether he deserved those things. And that was what made Raymond's thoughts feel complicated now, because in just a few hours she would discover the truth. The quiet man she had been speaking with all week was not a struggling visitor looking for work. He was the CEO of the company where she worked. Raymond walked toward the bedroom and opened the closet. Inside, hanging neatly on a single hanger, was the suit he had brought with him when he first arrived at the apartment. The same suit employees had seen in company photographs. The same suit that represented the position he held. Raymond stared at it for a moment. It had been several days since he last wore clothing like that. For a week he had lived without the authority that normally followed him everywhere. And strangely, part of him had appreciated that experience, because without the influence of his title, he had been able to observe people honestly. Raymond removed the suit from the closet and laid it carefully across the bed. Then he returned to the table near the window where the small notebook rested. He opened it slowly. Page after page contained the notes he had written throughout the week. Short descriptions of interactions, observations about behavior, moments where employees revealed something about their character. Raymond turned several pages before stopping near the middle. One particular note stood out from the others. Coffee offered, without hesitation. Raymond smiled faintly. That moment had stayed with him from the very beginning. It had been such a simple act, yet it revealed more about character than any interview or resume ever could. Raymond closed the notebook gently. The experiment had served its purpose. Now it was time to act on what he had learned. He changed into the suit slowly, adjusting the jacket and straightening the tie in front of the mirror. The transformation was immediate. The man staring back at him looked completely different from the person who had been walking through the building all week. The confident posture returned, the polished appearance, the presence that employees recognized instantly. For the first time in days, Raymond looked like the CEO again. He studied his reflection quietly. Soon the entire company would see this version of him, and many of them would suddenly remember their interactions with the quiet man carrying a backpack. Some employees would feel embarrassed. Some would feel nervous. Others might not even realize what they had revealed about themselves. But Raymond knew the purpose of the meeting was not to humiliate anyone. It was to confront the truth. Because the culture of a company could only improve when people understood their actions. Raymond adjusted his tie once more. Then he picked up the notebook and placed it inside a small leather briefcase. He would bring it to the meeting later, not as evidence to embarrass anyone, but as a reminder of what he had witnessed. Before leaving the apartment, Raymond paused one last time. His thoughts returned again to the woman. He wondered what her reaction would be when she saw him walk onto the stage later that afternoon. Would she feel surprised, confused, maybe even betrayed? Raymond hoped she would understand why the experiment had been necessary, because the values she demonstrated all week were exactly the values he wanted his company to represent. Raymond picked up the briefcase and walked toward the door. The hallway outside the apartment was quiet. As he stepped outside, the morning sun had fully risen above the buildings across the city. Dallas looked as busy as ever. Raymond walked toward his car parked along the street. For the first time in several days, he would not be walking to the company building as a stranger. Today, he would arrive as himself. The drive toward the headquarters building felt strangely calm. Traffic moved steadily along the streets, while the tall glass towers of downtown Dallas reflected the bright sky above. When Raymond finally reached the parking area beside the company building, he sat inside the car for a moment before stepping out. The building stood exactly as it always had. Hundreds of employees were already inside, continuing their work without knowing what the afternoon meeting would reveal. Raymond stepped out of the car and looked up at the familiar structure. Soon every person inside would gather together. Soon the experiment would come to an end. And soon the quiet man who had spent the week observing their behavior would walk onto the stage where everyone could see him clearly. Raymond adjusted the sleeve of his jacket. The moment he had planned since the beginning of the experiment had finally arrived. The truth was only a few hours away. By early afternoon, the atmosphere inside the company headquarters had changed. The notice about the company-wide meeting had spread quickly through every department. Employees talked about it quietly while finishing their work, wondering what the announcement might involve. Company meetings happened occasionally, but gatherings that required every department to attend were far less common. Naturally, curiosity grew. In one section of the office, two employees spoke in low voices while organizing documents. "Do you think something big is happening?" one asked. The other shrugged. "Maybe a new project announcement. Or layoffs." The first employee whispered. The second shook his head quickly. "I doubt it. The company's been doing well." Across the office floor, similar conversations took place. Speculation filled the air. But one detail seemed to interest people more than anything else. Many employees believed the CEO himself would attend the meeting. For a large number of workers inside the company, that possibility alone created excitement. Most had never seen Raymond in person before. They had read about him in internal newsletters. They had seen his photograph in company presentations, but very few had ever shared the same room with him. Meanwhile, the woman sat at her desk, reviewing a report on her computer screen. She had heard the same rumors as everyone else. Still, something about the situation felt slightly unusual to her. She glanced toward the hallway outside the office. Over the past week, she had grown used to seeing Raymond walk through the building at different times of the day. Sometimes he passed quietly through the department. Other times they spoke briefly near the elevators or outside the entrance. But today she hadn't seen him once. She leaned back in her chair and thought about it for a moment. That felt strange. Raymond had been present almost every day since their first conversation. Now, on the day of the meeting, he was nowhere in sight. She looked around the office again. Employees were beginning to stand from their desks, gathering notebooks and tablets as the meeting time approached. The woman stood as well, collecting her own folder. "Heading to the meeting?" a coworker asked. She nodded. "Looks like everyone else is." They walked together toward the elevator area. As the elevator doors opened, a small group of employees stepped inside. The atmosphere inside the elevator was full of quiet anticipation. "Do you think the CEO will really be there?" someone asked. "I heard he might," another replied. "I've never seen him in person." The woman listened quietly while the conversation continued. For some reason, her thoughts kept drifting back to Raymond. She wondered where he was. Maybe he had found work somewhere else. Maybe he had simply decided not to return. The elevator doors opened on the lower level, where the large conference hall was located. Employees stepped out and followed the flow of people toward the wide doors at the end of the corridor. Inside the hall, rows of chairs filled the space from the front stage to the back wall. A large screen displayed the company logo, while soft lighting illuminated the stage area. Employees gradually filled the seats, speaking quietly, while waiting for the meeting to begin. The woman found a seat several rows from the front. She placed her folder on her lap and looked around the room. Hundreds of employees had already gathered. Managers sat beside junior staff. Department leaders spoke with assistants. Everyone waited with the same curiosity. Where was the CEO? A few minutes later, the lights in the hall dimmed slightly. A senior manager walked onto the stage and stepped behind the podium. The conversations in the room quickly faded. "Good afternoon, everyone," the manager began. "Thank you for taking time out of your schedules to attend today's meeting." Employees shifted in their seats, focusing their attention toward the stage. The manager smiled politely. "Today, we have an important message to share with the entire company." He paused for a moment before continuing. "And it will be delivered by someone you've all heard about many times." A few employees leaned forward. The woman felt a small wave of curiosity. The manager stepped slightly to the side. "Please welcome our CEO." The room grew silent. All eyes turned toward the side entrance near the stage. For several seconds, nothing happened. Then the door opened. Footsteps echoed softly across the stage. A tall man walked forward wearing a dark suit and carrying himself with quiet confidence. The room remained silent as employees looked at him carefully. Some people leaned forward slightly. Others exchanged confused glances, because something about the man walking toward the podium looked strangely familiar. The woman narrowed her eyes slightly. Her mind struggled to understand what she was seeing. The man stepped into the light at the center of the stage. The senior manager nodded respectfully and stepped away from the podium. The man reached the microphone and looked across the room. In that moment, the entire conference hall froze, because many employees suddenly realized something impossible. They had seen this man before, not in a suit, not standing on a stage, but walking through the building wearing worn clothes and carrying a backpack. The quiet man they had ignored, the man some had laughed at, the man the woman had shared coffee with earlier in the week, now stood confidently in front of them as the CEO. A wave of shock moved across the room. The woman stared at the stage, completely stunned. Her mind replayed every conversation she had shared with Raymond, every cup of coffee, every walk outside the building, and suddenly everything made sense. The man standing at the microphone was not a temporary worker. He was Raymond, the CEO of the entire company. Raymond rested his hands calmly on the podium and looked out at the room filled with employees. The silence inside the conference hall was absolute, because everyone in that room now understood one thing. The quiet man they had been watching all week had been watching them. The silence inside the conference hall stretched for several long seconds. Hundreds of employees stared toward the stage, their expressions frozen between disbelief and confusion. Raymond stood calmly behind the podium. The confident posture that employees recognized from company photographs was unmistakable now. The tailored suit, the steady voice, the calm authority in his presence. Everything about him confirmed the truth. But what stunned the audience was not who he was, it was what he had done. Many people in the room had spent the past week seeing Raymond in an entirely different form. A quiet man with worn clothes, a backpack resting on one shoulder, someone who appeared to have no connection to the company at all. And now that same man stood in front of them as their CEO. Raymond allowed the silence to settle before he spoke. "Good afternoon," he said. His voice carried clearly across the room. No one moved. No one whispered. Every employee remained focused on the stage. Raymond looked slowly across the audience. Some employees avoided eye contact. Others stared openly, trying to process what they had just realized. "For the past week," Raymond continued calmly, "I have been walking through this building in a way none of you expected." A ripple of tension passed through the room. Raymond rested his hands lightly on the podium. "I did not enter this company as the CEO." He paused. "I entered as someone many of you believed did not matter." Several employees shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Raymond continued speaking in the same calm tone. "I wore simple clothes. I carried a backpack. I sat in the lobby. I walked through the hallways. And I listened." The room remained silent. Some employees lowered their heads slightly. Raymond glanced toward the large screen behind him. With a small gesture, he signaled to the technical staff near the side of the stage. The screen came to life. The first video clip appeared. It showed the building entrance early in the morning. Employees walked through the glass doors, while Raymond stood nearby wearing the worn jacket and carrying his backpack. Several people in the audience immediately recognized the scene. One employee glanced briefly at Raymond before walking past him without speaking. Another slowed down, whispered something to a coworker, and both of them laughed quietly. The video paused. Raymond looked toward the audience again. "This moment happened on my first morning inside the building," he said. The screen changed to another clip. This one showed Raymond standing near the security desk in the lobby. The guard spoke with him, while employees passed by in the background. Some glanced at the conversation. Others ignored it completely. The video paused again. Raymond allowed the audience to absorb what they were seeing. "These recordings were not made to embarrass anyone," he said. "They were made to reveal something important." He stepped slightly away from the podium and walked across the stage. "A company's culture is not defined by mission statements on a website," he continued. "It is defined by how people treat each other when they believe no one important is watching." Several employees shifted in their seats. Raymond returned to the podium. The screen changed again. This time, a different moment appeared. Raymond walked through an office floor, while a small group of employees sat at nearby desks. One of them made a comment that caused laughter from the others. The clip ended quickly. The tension inside the conference hall grew heavier. Raymond's voice remained calm. "Some of you showed respect, some of you showed indifference, and some of you revealed behavior that does not belong in this company." The words hung in the air. Raymond turned slightly toward the screen again. "But this experiment also showed me something encouraging." The next video appeared. The building entrance. Raymond standing near the door. Employees walking past him without stopping. Then the moment everyone recognized. The woman approaching with 2 cups of coffee. The room grew even quieter. The clip showed her pausing beside Raymond, speaking to him, then handing him one of the cups. Raymond watched the screen along with everyone else. "That moment happened on the very first morning," he said softly. "No one asked her to do that. No one was watching. She believed she was helping a stranger." Raymond looked out across the audience. "And that simple act told me more about character than any resume ever could." Many employees turned their heads toward the woman sitting among them. She remained completely still in her seat. Her eyes stayed fixed on the stage. Raymond continued speaking. "Throughout this week, I observed many interactions inside this company. Some of them made me proud. Others made it clear that we still have work to do." He placed both hands on the podium again. "But leadership is not about pretending problems don't exist. It is about facing them honestly." Raymond paused before continuing. "I did this experiment because I wanted to see the truth with my own eyes." He looked across the audience once more. "And now all of us have seen that truth together." No one spoke. No one moved. The weight of the moment settled over the entire room. Raymond's voice softened slightly. "But I also learned something else," during this week. He glanced briefly toward the woman again. I was reminded that the values we talk about as a company still exist in the people who choose to live by them every day. He returned his gaze to the audience. Respect, kindness, integrity. These qualities are not defined by job titles. They are revealed through actions. Raymond straightened slightly behind the podium. And moving forward, those values will define the culture of this company more clearly than ever before. The room remained silent, but the meaning of his words was clear to everyone present. The week of observation had exposed both the strengths and the weaknesses inside the organization. And from that moment on, every employee in the room understood something they would never forget. The quiet man they had ignored, judged, or helped throughout the week had been their CEO all along. The silence inside the conference hall remained heavy, even after Raymond finished speaking. Hundreds of employees sat motionless in their chairs, absorbing everything they had just witnessed. The videos, the explanation, and the realization of what had taken place during the past week created a weight that could not easily be ignored. For many people in the room, the moment felt deeply personal. Some employees stared down at their hands. Others avoided looking toward the stage entirely. A few people exchanged uneasy glances with coworkers sitting beside them. Raymond allowed the room to remain quiet for a few seconds longer before continuing. I want to make something very clear, he said calmly. This experiment was never meant to embarrass anyone. His voice remained steady but firm. It was meant to reveal something important about our culture. Raymond rested his hands lightly on the podium as he looked across the audience again. A company can only grow stronger when its people understand the responsibility they carry every day. He paused briefly, not just to the business, but to each other. A few employees slowly raised their eyes toward the stage. Raymond continued. Titles and job descriptions do not define the value of a person. What truly matters is how we treat others when there is nothing to gain. His words echoed quietly through the hall. Then Raymond turned slightly and gestured toward the large screen behind him. During this past week, he said, I saw many different sides of this company. Some moments showed kindness, some showed indifference, and some revealed behavior that must change if we want this organization to represent the values we claim to stand for. He paused again. But one moment stood above all the others. Raymond's eyes moved across the audience until they stopped on the woman sitting several rows from the front. The entire room seemed to follow his gaze. Employees turned in their seats, trying to see who he was looking at. Raymond spoke again. On the first morning of this experiment, while I stood outside the building, dressed like someone many people chose to ignore, one person stopped. The woman felt every eye in the room turning toward her. She remained completely still in her seat. That person offered a stranger a cup of coffee. Raymond continued. No questions, no hesitation, just kindness. The room remained silent as employees watched the woman. Raymond's voice softened slightly. That action may have seemed small at the time, but it revealed something powerful. He stepped away from the podium and walked slowly across the stage. It showed that character is not connected to position. It showed that respect is a choice, and it showed that the culture we want inside this company still exists in the people who choose to live by those values every day. Raymond stopped near the edge of the stage. I want to thank you, he said directly to her. The woman blinked in surprise. Raymond continued. You reminded me why this company was built in the first place. His words carried through the quiet room. For years we have talked about integrity, respect, and leadership, but those values only mean something when people practice them in moments, when nobody believes anyone important is watching. Several employees lowered their heads again. Raymond returned to the podium, and that is exactly what happened that morning. He paused before continuing. So today, I want everyone here to understand something very clearly. A person's character will always matter more than their job title. The statement lingered in the air. Raymond looked across the audience again. If you want to grow in this company, if you want to lead teams, manage departments, or represent this organization in the future, he paused. Then the way you treat people will matter more than any number on a performance report. A few employees nodded slowly. Others remained quiet, reflecting on their own behavior during the past week. Raymond continued speaking. Starting today, we will begin making changes that reinforce those values. He glanced briefly towards several department leaders seated in the front rows. We will review how teams interact with temporary staff, visitors, and new employees. We will strengthen training that focuses on leadership through respect, and we will ensure that the culture of this company reflects the standards we expect from everyone who works here. Raymond's tone remained calm, but his message was unmistakable. The experiment had revealed things that needed to change, and those changes would begin immediately. He rested his hands on the podium once more. But while this week showed us areas where we can improve, Raymond glanced toward the woman again. It also reminded us that the best example of leadership can come from anyone. The room remained completely quiet. Raymond allowed that moment to settle. Then he nodded slightly. Thank you all for listening. The meeting slowly came to an end, but the impact of Raymond's words lingered across the entire conference hall. Employees stood from their chairs in thoughtful silence. Some avoided eye contact with coworkers. Others spoke quietly while processing what had just happened. Across the room, the woman remained seated for a moment longer. Her mind was still trying to absorb everything. The quiet man she had shared coffee with, the person she had walked beside during lunch breaks, the man she believed was simply looking for temporary work. He had been the CEO all along, and now the entire company knew the story of that first cup of coffee. Raymond stepped away from the stage as employees began leaving the hall. But one thing was already clear. The culture inside the company had just taken its first step toward something better, and the person who had unknowingly started that change was sitting quietly among the employees who were only beginning to understand the lesson Raymond had revealed. The conference hall slowly began to empty as employees filed toward the exits in small groups. Most people walked quietly. The usual casual conversations that followed company meetings were noticeably absent. Instead, the atmosphere felt thoughtful, almost heavy, as employees processed what they had just witnessed. The past week, inside the company, had suddenly taken on an entirely new meaning. Some employees glanced toward the stage before leaving, still trying to understand how they had missed the truth. Others avoided looking in Raymond's direction at all. Raymond stepped down from the stage after speaking briefly with a few department leaders near the front row. His expression remained calm, but inside his thoughts were focused on one person. Across the hall, the woman still sat in her chair. The room around her continued to clear out, yet she had not moved. Her eyes remained fixed on the stage where Raymond had been standing moments earlier. Raymond walked slowly across the conference floor toward her. Each step felt strangely different from the quiet walks they had shared during the week. Back then, he had been a stranger with a backpack. Now, every employee in the building knew exactly who he was. When Raymond stopped beside her row of chairs, she finally looked up. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The silence between them carried a mixture of surprise, confusion, and something else Raymond could not quite identify. Finally, she exhaled slowly and shook her head. I don't even know what to say, she admitted. Raymond gave a small, understanding smile. That's fair. She looked at him carefully, as if trying to match the person standing in front of her with the man she had spoken with all week. She said slowly, You're the CEO. Raymond nodded. Yes. She leaned back in her chair and laughed softly. I spent the entire week talking to the person who runs this company, and I had no idea. Raymond chuckled. You treated me like a normal person. That's because I thought you were one, she replied quickly. Raymond raised an eyebrow with a playful expression. I'm hoping I still qualify. That made her laugh again, easing some of the tension in the moment. Well, she said, most CEOs I've heard about don't walk around their offices pretending to be homeless. Raymond nodded thoughtfully. That's probably true. She crossed her arms slightly, still studying him. You planned this whole thing? Yes. For how long? A few weeks, Raymond replied. She shook her head again. I can't believe it. Then she paused, her expression becoming more serious. Wait a second. Raymond watched her carefully. You knew every time we talked, she continued, that I didn't know who you were. Yes. And you just let me keep talking? Raymond nodded again. I wanted to hear what people were really like. She narrowed her eyes slightly. So our conversations were part of the experiment? Raymond shook his head gently. No. That answer caught her attention. What do you mean? Raymond leaned slightly against the back of the chair in front of him. The experiment was about observing how employees treated someone they believed had no influence. He paused. But talking with you was something different. She looked curious. How so? Raymond smiled faintly. You were the only person who treated me the same way every single time we spoke. The woman considered that quietly. Well, she said, that's because I thought you needed help. Raymond nodded. And you offered it without expecting anything in return. She shrugged casually. That's just basic decency. Raymond laughed softly. You'd be surprised how rare that can be. She looked around the now nearly empty conference hall. I guess this week proved that. Raymond followed her gaze. Most employees had already left the room. A few remained near the exits, speaking quietly with coworkers. Then she looked back at Raymond again. You know something funny? She said. What? I almost didn't offer you that coffee the first morning. Raymond looked surprised. Really? She nodded. I was running late for work. I saw you standing there and thought about just walking inside. She smiled slightly. But then I remembered something my grandmother used to say. Raymond finished the sentence with her. Treat people right, even when nobody is watching. She laughed. Exactly. Raymond felt a quiet sense of appreciation hearing those words again. That simple lesson had shaped the entire story of the past week. The woman stood from her chair and stretched slightly. Well, she said, I guess this has been the most unexpected work week of my life. Raymond smiled. Mine too. She glanced toward the stage once more. I'm glad you did this experiment, she admitted. You are? Yes. Raymond looked curious. Why? She thought about it for a moment. Because now people will think twice before treating someone poorly. Raymond nodded. That was the goal. They began walking slowly toward the exit of the conference hall together. As they reached the doorway, she stopped and turned toward him again. I have one more question, she said. Raymond raised an eyebrow. What is it? She crossed her arms with a playful expression. Did you actually enjoy that chicken sandwich I made? Or were you just being polite because it was part of your experiment? Raymond laughed. That sandwich was incredible. She smiled proudly. Good answer. Raymond shook his head with a grin. You still don't believe me? Oh, I believe you, she said. But if the CEO says my cooking is good, I'm definitely telling my family about that. Raymond chuckled. I think they'll appreciate hearing it. They stepped out into the hallway together. For the first time since the meeting began, the tension between them had completely faded. Instead, something else had taken its place. Mutual respect. Because although their roles inside the company were very different, the week they had spent talking as equals had created a connection neither of them expected. And that connection was only beginning to grow. The afternoon sun stretched across the streets of downtown Dallas as employees slowly returned to their offices after the meeting. The atmosphere inside the building felt different now. People spoke more quietly than usual. Conversations carried a thoughtful tone. The events of the past week and the truth revealed in the conference hall had left a strong impression on everyone who worked there. Raymond walked through the lobby beside the woman. For the first time since the experiment began, he was no longer wearing worn clothes or carrying a backpack. He looked exactly like the CEO employees recognized from company reports and meetings. Several workers passing through the lobby nodded respectfully as they saw him. Others straightened their posture as he walked by. The woman noticed the reactions and smiled slightly. That must take some getting used to, she said. Raymond glanced at her. What do you mean? All the sudden respect, she replied. Raymond chuckled quietly. You'd be surprised how quickly people change their behavior when they know who you are. She nodded. That's exactly why your experiment mattered. They stepped outside, through the large glass doors at the front of the building. The warm Texas air greeted them immediately. Raymond looked toward the familiar bench near the entrance plaza, the same bench where they had shared lunch earlier in the week. He gestured toward it. Do you have a few minutes? He asked. She followed his gaze and smiled. Sure. They walked over and sat down. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Cars moved steadily along the street nearby, while employees from neighboring buildings passed along the sidewalk carrying their bags and phones. The city continued its busy rhythm. Raymond leaned back slightly on the bench. This place looks different today, he said. The woman glanced toward the building behind them. Because everyone inside is thinking about what happened in that meeting. Raymond nodded. That's probably true. She turned toward him. Do you think people will really change? Raymond thought about the question carefully before answering. Change doesn't happen overnight, he said. But moments like today can make people reflect on their choices. The woman rested her hands on her knees. My grandmother used to say something about that too. Raymond smiled. I'm starting to think your grandmother had wisdom about almost everything. She laughed. She had plenty of opinions, that's for sure. Raymond looked toward the busy street for a moment. When I started this company, he said slowly, I believed success would come from building strong systems and smart strategies. He paused. And those things matter. But over time, I realized something even more important. The woman listened closely. A company is really just a group of people making decisions every day. Small decisions, Raymond continued. How we speak to someone, how we respond when someone needs help, how we treat people when there's nothing to gain. He turned slightly toward her. That's what defines the culture of an organization. She nodded. That makes sense. Raymond smiled faintly. This week reminded me that culture can't be written in policy documents. It lives in the behavior of the people who work there. The woman leaned back on the bench. Well, at least now everyone knows someone might be watching. Raymond laughed softly. That's not exactly the lesson I want them to take away. She raised an eyebrow. Then what is? Raymond looked thoughtful for a moment before answering. The real lesson is that we shouldn't need someone watching to do the right thing. She considered that quietly. Fair point. A short silence followed, as they both watched the movement of people across the plaza. After a moment she spoke again. You know, I keep thinking about that first morning. Raymond looked at her. The coffee? Yes, she said. I had no idea that one small decision would turn into all of this. Raymond smiled. That's often how the most important moments in life begin. She glanced toward him. You really believe that? Raymond nodded. Absolutely. He gestured toward the building behind them. That single moment showed me something I needed to see. What's that? That the values I hoped this company would represent still exist in the people who work here. She looked slightly embarrassed. You're giving me too much credit. Raymond shook his head. No. Leadership isn't always about standing on a stage giving speeches. Sometimes it's about simple actions that influence the people around us. The woman looked down at the ground for a moment before smiling again. Well, if you're going to call offering coffee leadership, I guess I'll accept the compliment. Raymond laughed. I think you've earned it. The late afternoon sunlight stretched longer shadows across the sidewalk. Employees from the building continued walking past them, though fewer people were rushing now. Raymond stood slowly from the bench. I should probably head back inside, he said. There's a lot of work ahead after today. The woman stood as well. Changing a company culture isn't a small task. Raymond nodded. No, but it's worth doing. They walked a few steps toward the building entrance before Raymond stopped again. He turned toward her. Thank you, he said. She looked surprised. For what? For reminding me why I started this company in the first place. She smiled warmly. You're welcome. They reached the entrance doors. Employees passing nearby greeted Raymond respectfully as they entered the building. But Raymond's attention remained on the woman beside him. You know, he said, this bench might become my favorite place in the city. She laughed. Because of the coffee? Because of the lesson, Raymond replied. She opened the door and stepped inside with him. The lobby buzzed quietly with activity as employees returned to their desks. Raymond paused for a moment before walking toward the elevators. The week-long experiment had revealed more than he expected. It had exposed weaknesses inside the company, but it had also reminded him of something powerful. Character reveals itself in the smallest moments. And sometimes the future of an entire organization can be influenced by a single act of kindness. As the elevator doors closed behind him, Raymond knew the work of building a stronger culture had only just begun, but he also knew something else. In the end, kindness would always reveal the true character of a person.